I'm Bryce Futch,
I'm Spencer Amaral.
and this is The Way Forward. Welcome back to part 2 of our government as an institution episode. So really, I guess it's episode 2 of government as an institution. And for this one, we just finished talking about kind of the philosophical view of government and what it's supposed to do and what it's supposed to be based on and all of that good stuff. And so for this one, we want to make it more practical. So talk about some of the ways government's broken, some things that we can do to fix it, and some ways that we can move forward, right? Because that's kind of the overall view of the podcast is not just what are the problems, but what is the path forward on fixing some of these problems and engaging with them. So yeah, well, why don't we start off by talking about how our Republican system as a whole is broken, right? So in our last episode, we talked about how terrible of a president Woodrow Wilson was. We have one more thing to thank him for, which was the direct election of senators. So pre-Woodrow Wilson, your senator was elected by your House of Representatives, and they were there to be a representation of your state. That's why every state has 2 of them.
State assembly.
Right.
Right.
Yep. So they were there to look after the best use or the best interest of your state as a whole, not the party. Now, they would naturally be kind of bent in one party direction or the other based off which party had control of your state house. But their goal was not, they did not answer to the Republican National Party, did not answer to the Democratic National Party. They answered to your state. And this was really good because with your state reps, with a state rep, state senator, you know them, right? Kids go to school together. You guys go to the same church. You shop in the same grocery stores. You see them at Little League. Like they're a part of your life, right? They're the closest to you. And in the Republican system of government, we elect our electors, right? So we elect them to represent us. And then if they send somebody to the Senate who you think is doing a terrible job, you can go to them. You can say, hey, Bill, I don't know why you sent this guy to Washington. He's doing a terrible job. He's not representing the interest of our state. You need to send somebody else. You had that opportunity to hold your state representative accountable. Now, with the direct election of senators, you don't. I don't know of anybody that can, unless you have millions of dollars in the bank, that can just fly to D.C. and walk into your senator's office and see your senator. You can't do it. It's not possible. There's no access. And so that keeps these senators beholden to the party line. They now are responsible to the party. They are just simply a secondary branch of the House of Representatives. So the House of Representatives was supposed to be there, right, to represent the people. The Senate, on the other hand, was supposed to be there to represent the state, and they were supposed to be a check and balance to each other, right? Not just a check and balance by institution, but a check and balance by who they represented. So this has created some serious party line partisan problems in D.C. And I think one of the ways that we fix this, I mean, obviously the best way would be to repeal that constitutional amendment that creates the direct election of senators. I think it should have been found unconstitutional to begin with. I don't think it should have been a thing. But I think part of it is, we'll take a step back before we talk about a solution to partisan politics, because that's an easy one. That's a joke. There's no easy solution to partisan politics. But I do think we're seeing presidentially right now one of the most viable third-party opportunities in a long time. Both parties are taking note of both Robert Kennedy, RFK, and they're also taking note of the No Labels movement. Both of these 2 groups have a substantial amount of clout. They do have access on ballots. They have made some really strategic gains. Now, I don't think either of these candidates are going to be viable to win, but they are going to be viable to make the other candidates engage on some issues that they probably weren't going to engage on. So I think having a diversity in your political party system is good. Spencer, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of that foundational view of why the 2-party system was seen as taboo by our founders?
Sure.
Remember, that was one of the parting words that we were given by Washington, right? Was to avoid the 2-party system.
Yeah, you see it in Washington, especially his farewell address. You see it clearly present in the Federalist Papers before the whole, erection of the constitutional system. But it's always articulated as the threat of factionalism, right? So you have this danger of us splitting into factions which then take on an identity and a life of their own and constantly pit people against one another, and we're at one another's throats. And that's where we're at today, right? So they didn't even conceive of this as being a two-party thing. I think they viewed it more likely to be a geographic thing, and like you have factions that represent different states, and each one is going to kind of be out for their own interests. Now, of course, mathematically, it makes sense today that you're going to end up with a two-party system when the goal is majority status, right? Because all you need to get is 50% plus one. And thus you create an incentive for there to be two parties, and they're each kind of hovering somewhere around the middle of mainstream thought, because you need to get a chunk of the center plus one. The founding fathers didn't even like the idea of campaigning for president. Never mind party politics and machine politics, right? And yet it took almost no time for the party system to emerge.
Right.
The first big example of it is the 1800 election between Jefferson and Adams, where you see the ruling party, the Federalists, and Adams, coming off his one term as president, he's running for re-election, and the challenger is Thomas Jefferson. And of course, like, they're so coy about it because they're trying to maintain their dignity, right? So it's like Jefferson wouldn't even go and make speeches. It's more like other people would go and campaign on his behalf and be like, I really want to nominate this guy, and we should all get together and vote for this guy. And you have a lot of momentum that gathers around this idea of a Republican Party. And it's ironic because this became the Democratic Party under Jackson. Yeah. And so they're kind of like the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans, right? And that becomes the original opposition party to the Federalists, the party of Washington. Now, when Washington was there, no one dared to oppose him, right? That was political suicide to oppose Washington. Adams comes in, and he's riding so high on the coattails of Washington, he wins his first term pretty easily. But it's the re-election where he's just stuck in the mud, and Jefferson comes out and defeats him on some hot button issues of the time. It was the Alien Sedition Act were the big ones, and Adams didn't really connect with the people. He was a New Englander, right? He had a lot of things going against him. He wasn't really an Orthodox Christian at this point. He was wandering towards Unitarianism, away from his Calvinist roots. Like, a lot of weird stuff was going on with these guys individually, and then as these parties are kind of manifesting themselves, originally they start around personalities, and then it takes on an ideological format. And I think maybe the easiest way to think about this is you got the two competing influences from Europe, best signified by Britain and France. You got the Anglophiles on one side and the Francophiles on the other. The Jeffersonians tended to be obsessed with France. They loved French culture, the impulses towards liberty. They were thrilled about the French Revolution at first when it got started, right? And then it went sideways and they stopped owning it.
Right.
And then you had the Federalists, which tended to be a little more aristocratic, a little more conservative in nature, establishment oriented, or ordered towards stability in society. The Washingtons, the Adams, Hamilton. They also favored stronger central government, slightly, right? Like, not for the sake of it, right? But in order to get things done and to counterbalance the impulse for small petty tyrants to arise at the local level. Right. So if you read through the Federalist Papers, you see them aware of all these different ways that this thing could go wrong. But the one thing that they're reacting to directly is the Articles of Confederation, right? Which is the way that we kind of duct taped the several states together to fight the revolution, and then to try to figure out a working peace afterwards. And it was just chaotic without a meaningful central government. Right. And so the Constitution reflects the failure of the Articles of Confederation. The other thing that I love pointing out about the Constitution, if you go back to the English Civil Wars, and you look at the broad sweep of it, you have the wars themselves. You have eventually, King Charles is captured. He loses the war, and then he's executed as a tyrant. And you have 10 years of I don't want to call it Republican rule. It's 10 years of dictatorship under Cromwell, right? But without a king per se.
Right.
But like they don't have a good system to fall back on, so they just replace the king with a dictator.
Right.
And he functions like a dictator. He's the only guy who ever went to Ireland and put down a rebellion in Ireland, right?
Right.
With an iron fist.
Yeah.
So Cromwell lives for 10 years. As soon as he dies, their best second solution is to replace him with his son, which is just laughable because you're supposed to be the party that is against monarchy.
Right.
And we'll replace the dictator with his son.
Their son, yeah.
And then he doesn't last like more than a few days and he's run out of town.
Right.
And the people welcome the monarchy back. They want a king again. Okay. There's kind of some Old Testament motifs here as well.
Yes, indeed.
But they want the king back, and there's a restoration of the crown. Similarly, I think you could argue in the American arc, you reject the king and the parliament, and you have a season of very like rule by confederation of the states, and it doesn't really work. And there's what was the word I just used? I'm having my after lunch mental lapse. Like the restoration of the monarch, you have a kind of restoration of that English approach to government in America with the Constitution, where lo and behold, you have bicameral legislature, you have a strong central executive. It's just slightly arranged, and you get there slightly differently through, votes and.
Yeah. Well, it's like they elevated the prime minister to the position of king, basically, right?
Right. In some ways, our president is more powerful than prime minister.
Right. So
because
it's kind
he's
of
both.
It's like it's a meeting of the two. No, I think that's really good. I think too part of it is part of the danger in the two-party system is if you look at the last 60-ish years now, we transitioned from having clear-cut enemies of fascism in the Second World War, Nazism, to communism, to now there's no real... There is absolutely... I am a firm believer that there is absolutely a Cold War that we're in right now between the United States, Russia, China, and Iran. But it's not a declared Cold War like it was with the communists, right? And when we were fighting the communists, there was some very... excuse me, getting over some allergies. There were some very... bad things that happened on the U.S. side. But they were dwarfed in comparison by what happened on the Russian side. And so on the whole, the United States rallied together, just kind of like we did post 9/11, right? We were very unified as a country because we had a common enemy that we were striving to defeat. And we were able to put our focus on that. But now because we don't have that common enemy, people still need to sell newspapers. They need to sell website visits. They need sensationalism, and so what do? They just turn this vitriol against their neighbor who believes slightly different than they do. Now, I do think modern leftist ideology is very different than historic leftist ideology, right? The desire to, provide late-term abortions, the desire to allow kids to transition at such early ages where they have no real understanding of what's going on around them and to allow that genital mutilation is horrific, right? And so there are some bad actors, and there are some people that have legitimately evil intentions, but that's not the rank and file of the left, right? The rank and file of the left genuinely wants personal freedom. They genuinely want a better life. For example, healthcare, right? Healthcare, we live in one of the richest countries in the world. There's no reason that if you have a health problem and you don't have insurance, that you should be turned away at the ER and not get the help you need. There's no reason for that. But at the same time, having a universal healthcare system does nothing but decrease competition, decreases personal incentive. We can look at Great Britain and see how poorly that universal healthcare system works. Same thing in Canada. People can't get access to the care they need in a timely manner. The doctors are not nearly as skilled. They're not as progressive in their medical interventions. So there's a middle ground between the two, right? But people on both the right and the left would say that I think both people would agree that healthcare is a good thing to provide for people, right? That we want people to be healthy in their life and to have the care they need when they need it. Right. I think both sides would agree that, we want a better life for our kids than we had. Now, what that better life looks like is different, but we want that similar outcome. So that to me, the real danger in the party politics piece is the personal part of it, where they attack individuals about specific things. And most of the time it's overhyped. And both the right and the left do it, and they do it because it engages their base, right? And unfortunately, because like you said earlier, we're in that majority rule country right now.
Right.
Whoever has the most engaged base is the one who will win. And I think it's a shame because we've lost that ability to sit down and disagree and reason well. Now, a big part of that is because of a lack of education, right? We're not turning out students who have a full understanding of how we came to be as a country, the principles in which we were founded, how those fit into a historical context, whether that's through the classics.
Yeah.
And we're not preparing people to engage on these ideas, which I think is a requirement of our government, right? Government should, if they are going to provide education, this is a well-educated public is a requirement for a functioning democracy, right?
Yeah.
And we have drastically failed our students. And one of the easy boxes to check to fix that is school choice, right? That is a huge first step in the right direction because it now offers education to everybody in whatever school is most competitive in their area. Mm-hmm. And it allows the parents the freedom to parent their children and to put them in the school they want them to be in without totally bankrupting them as individuals.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Giving people the tools to actually act in a way that is, according with their best interests and their well-being. Mm-hmm. If you can give people that latitude, that's always preferable.
Right.
The socialist experiment always fails because it's based on the idea that government has perfect knowledge of people's desires and needs and well-being, right? When people are always going to have a better sense of that on an individual basis or a local basis. So the more you can bring these things back to the family and back to the dinner table, back to the local community, the better.
Yeah.
It just allocates resources in a more efficient way. Mm-hmm. And I wish we would spend less time, demonizing, and this is what factions do.
Right.
They try to motivate their base. And this is where, unfortunately, people are begging for politicians to resort to these base tactics because they work. Right? How do you actually motivate your base? You get them angry and you scare them. And so no wonder that's what all of the propaganda leans towards. Right. It's because that's what works. If it didn't work, they wouldn't spend millions of dollars doing that.
Right.
So how do you get people that are resistant to the fear-mongering and the baiting and the factionalism and the hating of our neighbor who is on a different page than us? You have to find a way to actually recognize something that we have in common as Americans, right? So like we just finished in our previous conversation talking about the real need to actually love your community.
Yes.
Not just because they're doing everything that you like at the moment.
Right.
Like you have to actually make an active choice to love it in order to work towards a better future and make it more lovable.
Right.
Right? So that's number one. And it's also how we engage with it on a healthy way. But we also need to actively seek unity because that doesn't ever come about as the default. People naturally atomize. Yeah. We isolate, especially today with our ability to just withdraw into our house and look at our box. And we withdraw from everybody and we're happy doing that. So we say. So we have to seek unity and choose love over and over again.
Right.
If we can't do that in a meaningful way, the experiment's going to fail. Mm-hmm. For us, I think that there's an easy way to do this where we actually do have common ground, by and large, with one another. Most Americans still believe in God. We understand that there is an inherent relationship between this conversation about justice and the dignity of human life and this understanding in Western civilization that people are made in the image of God.
Right.
We're a majority Christian nation. Like all these things, we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to sound like Christian nationalists or theocrats or whatever you want to call it. But I think we actually should embrace this as a point of common ground among Americans where we understand, hey, what are we really talking about?
Right.
There's something intrinsically valuable about human life.
Yeah.
Let's start there. Oh, and by the way, that's where the country started. So if we look at the Declaration, can we find a lot of common ground there? I would hope so, right? That people derive their rights from God.
Right.
And these are gifts from our Creator. And we need to be able to not just agree on that on paper, we need to act that way. And when you start living that way, hopefully you can be resistant more so to all the animalistic debasing of your opponent and the demonizing that happens with factionalism, right? You're a little more resistant to the propaganda and the fear mongering.
Well, and it's also just from a political leader perspective, it's an understanding that power is not the ultimate goal, right? For example, take the recent legislation that was supposed to be bipartisan. It was on the border and it was on Ukraine. And the goal of it was to tackle two hot topics. It was to provide funding to Ukraine and to help secure the border. Mm-hmm. The deal, though, was flawed because the people who were pro-securing the border, a lot of those people have waned in their support for Ukraine. And so they didn't want to support the one. And then the group that wanted to support Ukraine was not as interested in securing the border.
Right.
But the leadership didn't want to pass standalone bills because they didn't want to give up that issue. They didn't want to solve that issue prior to the fall election, right?
Right.
And that's where you
perverse incentives.
Yes, and we're seeing that over and over again, where we have people who don't have the good of the country in mind. Well, and I think they self-rationalize, right? They self-rationalize and say, well, if we can raise a little more money, we can get a few more people elected. And if we can get a few more people elected, then we can pass more conservative or more progressive legislation, depending on which side of the aisle you're on.
Right. And
it's just this cycle where neither side gets the veto-proof majority that they desire. And then if they do, they don't get the White House, right? Like it's this constant back and forth. Whereas we need to say, look, our country is hurting. Our country is hurting deeply. What are the things that, like you said, that we can come together on? Let's pass a standalone border bill because we have the support, we have the votes to do it. Let's pass a standalone border bill that at least moves the ball 5 or 10 yards down the field and takes some of this pressure off.
Yeah.
And let's back up and punt and let's pass a standalone Ukraine bill that we think we can get enough support for and that'll move that ball 5, 10 yards down the field. We've lost that part of working together. Now, that doesn't mean you sacrifice principle. Right? I don't think you should ever sacrifice principle, but I think you should sacrifice practice, right? Like this accomplishes the principle, maybe in a slightly different way that I'd want, or not in as far of a way as I'd want. But we're at least moving in that direction.
Yeah.
It's that incrementalism that I think is a problem. But if you do that, then the other side, then your own party comes after you and says, well, this guy's a rhino, or this guy's just not a serious person, or this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And then they come after you, and then they primary you, and then now you've lost your seat.
Yeah, this goes back to we commented on the difference between an ideologue,
right,
and a pragmatist. You might say, someone who's aware of the desirability of prudence. Right, we don't talk about prudence very much anymore. It's such an underrated virtue. Mm-hmm. But it's a wise man seeking a worthy goal and understanding that you don't always get the whole thing on the first swing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to think really creatively because you're working with other people that you don't want to get there by just, shoving them at the point of a bayonet. That's not our approach. That's not our system. Other people have tried that. It doesn't work so well.
Right. I think it's kind of like baseball. I think baseball is a phenomenal sport. It's one of my favorites. Modern baseball is all about hitting the home run, right? It's all about hitting the long ball, and that's what batting coaches train their batters to do. As opposed to saying, hey, look, we're going to train you to get base hits. We're going to train you to get on base, and that's how we're going to move. That's how we're going to move the meter, and that's how we're going to win. If you watch baseball that's played like that, I personally think it's a lot more fun because there's more strategy. It's more active. It's not some guy stepping up to a plate and hitting like it's batting practice and hitting a 400-yard bomb, right? Or a 400-foot bomb. It's
a quarter of the time,
yeah,
or a tenth of the time,
right? It's
striking out all the rest.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's much more active. It's better played. You get better results, which was kind of that idea behind Moneyball, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing in politics today. We're looking for those home runs that so rarely come around anymore, and because of that, we're striking out all the time instead.
Yeah. The other danger of being an ideologue in this thing, it makes you a robot. It's the the one-dimensional approach you just talked about. If you are functioning like a robot, you've got one script. That's all you can see. It's all you can think. It's all you can talk about.
Right.
It's boring talking to you, for one. You're not going to connect with humans. You're not going to engage with the real world. You're not going to understand what prudence begins to look like. Versus just be a human being.
Right.
Connect with real people. Understand the challenges of your time, your society, where people's felt pain points are.
Yeah.
And figure out how to actually serve your people.
Right. Yeah, we need people who are a mix of those two things, right? That are solid on their ideology and are willing to move the ball forward. And they're dynamic enough to understand when it's a compromise on the pragmatics, on the form in which it's accomplished, and when it's a compromise on conviction. You never compromise on conviction, and you compromise on form whenever you need to. I think that's the dividing line there. I think another piece that's tied to that is the way we'll take the House of Representatives, for example, the way a modern congressman functions. I know it's the Senate and not the House, but you watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, right? When you see this
great movie,
phenomenal movie, highly recommend. But you have this guy, this joyful warrior who goes to he's entranced. He goes to D.C. He gets overtaken by the fraud and by the deceit, and he makes his stand and he wins in the end. Today, if you have a member of Congress or somebody who's running for Congress who gets up and says, if you elect me to Congress, I'm going to overhaul the tax code. I want to fix the tax system in the United States. Well, that's really nice to say. But unless he's bringing $500 million to the table to donate money to the RNC or to whoever to get the committee assignments that he needs to buy the access. Like if you want to be a committee chair, it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars that you have to go raise. That first off, that's insane. That is a miscarriage of our system. It's not about who's most qualified. It's about who can raise the most money. Huge problem, right?
Which tells you what?
It's all about the money. They don't want to solve the problem.
And it also tells you what it's not driven by. It's not driven by results.
Right.
It's not driven by competence.
No.
Which tells you, again, like the incentive is not to get things done. The incentive is to get your hands onto the wheel of power and stay there.
Right. So
and maybe sometimes losing your issue, right?
Absolutely.
Helps you to maintain that.
It does.
Which we've seen on the right with the abortion issue.
That's what I was about to say. The
and
exact same
healthcare and every other issue that the base cares about.
Right.
You talk to people who are staffers on the Hill who hear conversations, and it is stunning to hear the dissonance between what congressmen are saying in their office behind closed doors and what they say to their voters.
Yeah. You take the pro-life movement is a great example of this, right? The pro-life movement has given hundreds of millions of dollars to pro-life candidates, to pro-life causes, with no tangible results whatsoever. What is it that overturned Roe v. Wade? It was a Republican president who appointed solid Supreme Court justices who then defended a state bill, right? It was the state of Mississippi that overturned Roe v. Wade. It was not U.S. Congress. And it shows you how, like you said a minute ago, just how corrupt and broken that system is. I think so then we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, if the modern congressman, the guy who wants to be there because he's idealistic, he believes in the process, believes that institution is important, what should we expect of them? My personal opinion is that these people are basically becoming a glorified ombudsman for their community, for their constituents, right? They're the person that's the go-between for Veterans Affairs, for Social Security, for the guy who's running a small business who needs a permit. Like, the constituent relations is the bread and butter of what a modern congressman should be doing. I have a friend who his wife got injured in a car accident, has a horrific back injury. She's been unable to work for years, and they haven't been able to get the benefits that she's entitled to. And I asked him, I said, "Hey man, have you called your congressman?" And he goes, I can't call my congressman. Like, why would I call my congressman? Like, there's this disconnect of what they're there to do and what they're there for. And like, that is that congressman's job, is to take care of that constituent.
Which tells you we don't think of the congressman as a servant.
We don't.
Yeah.
We don't. We put them on
pedestal.
I think it's the wrong pedestal, right? I think they should be on one because they are representing an institution that, like I said in the previous episode, that was there long before them, that will be there long after them. They are merely a placeholder. They should be on a pedestal for that, and they should be held to a higher standard for that.
But you take the office seriously. But what is the office?
Correct. The office is an office of service.
And we lose that thread.
Yep, we do. And part of that is because we're limited on the number of congressmen we have, so they're representing more and more people. They have representatively, they have less staff. They don't have enough staff to keep up with the requests. There's some serious problems with the way Congress is currently functioning.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big one.
Well, if we as voters actually expected our congressmen to serve and work their tails off serving their people, most of the people who are drawn to politics would not be drawn to politics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So I'm just always reminded people tend to get the leaders that they deserve. When in terms of societies, either you're really on top of it and you're actively producing healthy leaders that are qualified and willing to take up the responsibility to do a hard job and do it well, and the society seeks those people out.
Right.
Or you get lazy and suddenly it catches you by surprise that there is a monster in control. Yeah. And then it's too late.
Yep. And that goes back to how much money is in how much of an impact money has on our system. To run for Congress today, you need at least $1 million, right? Like in the average person doesn't have that kind of access to money. And our media-based society has really hindered us in significant ways, both with the cost to get advertisements out, with the 30-second soundbite that is going viral. And so now the goal is not nuance, right? There's no room for a nuanced opinion from a congressman or from a elected representative. It's all about how much can I own the libs, and that's what gets
score a point.
Yeah,
get a jab in.
Right, and it's incredibly unproductive, and
it's incredibly satisfying too for the listener.
Sure.
Right, so we have to be really honest about the way in which social media and soundbite technology and the way the news works. It all is oriented towards entertainment value.
Right. There's a soundbite from a congressman the other day that I heard that. And this congressman was a former chief of staff for a U.S. senator. Like, he has a solid understanding of process and how the process works. And the comment that he made was so anti that process. Like, he had to know that what he was saying was wrong. Like, there's no way in my mind that he could not have known that what he was saying was absolutely false. But why was he saying it? He was saying it because that's the role that he plays. That's saying those types of strong comments to that audience is what he's best at. That's what he's used for, and it's shameful, in my opinion, that's a role that's required. Yeah,
I'm also thinking about political rallies I've been to in the not too distant past that tend to revolve more around I'm going to fight for you. I'm a fighter. Yeah. I'm going to really stick it to them, tough talk.
Yeah.
And very little substance, very little ideas. But you notice it's so much easier to motivate people, to get people riled up, to entertain people.
Yes.
Right? You can check off so many boxes over here that translate into what we want, votes.
Right.
By doing a lot of the shallow stuff. Whereas if you start to get into the nuances of ideas and substance and policy and what does progress really look like for our country and how do we practically pursue that, and how am I going to, lend myself to that fight?
Yeah.
That's where you start walking on thin ice, and you threaten, turning off a couple people here, a couple people there. And you can avoid all of that messy stuff by just focusing on what you hate
Right.
and have a negative oriented campaign.
Yeah, and there's a difference between doing that and actually fighting for the good, right? One is a bunch of talk, and the other is where are you when somebody's getting ready to pass an earmark that is funding a abortion facility in a third world country, right? Are you vehemently opposing that? Are you fighting that both from the process side, in any way that you can, as well as on the PR side? Or do you just get up and talk about it and then send out a campaign fundraising email afterwards and not actually do anything, right?
Right.
There's a difference between being a pundit that also happens to be an elected representative and being an elected representative that stands for and fights for the right things.
Yeah.
And that's in today's fast-paced media society, that's a hard thing for the public to tell the difference between the two without doing a lot of research on their own end.
It is.
Which goes back to a lack of an educated public, right? If our public is not educated and our public becomes lazy and unwilling to look up things and unwilling to research things and take things at face value because they're absorbing that sensationalized news, then it completely takes the rug out from any efforts to be truly pragmatic and bipartisan and moving the ball forward in a way that preserves conservative ideas but also makes progress, right? Like you can't just preserve these conservative ideas by saying no all the time, right? That's not the way the world functions.
Yeah. Stagnation cannot be your policy platform.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. But even then, like we say that, but sometimes that's the right thing, right? Like Mitch McConnell, love him, hate him, whatever you think of him. He's the reason that we don't have I just lost his name. Merrick Garland. That's why Merrick Garland is not on the Supreme Court, right? Because Mitch McConnell
Stood tough. Yeah.
he did. He was stagnant.
Took a lot of heat.
He took a ton of heat, but he didn't care because he's Cocaine Mitch, right? Like didn't bother him a bit. But then you turn around and then you talk about the pro-life issue, and that's not something that he's led on. That's something that he's potentially hurt us on pretty badly, right? So there's give and take to both, and you have to know when to be firm and when to stand, right. and when to not be obsessed with the gaining of political power. There's a big difference between knowing how to wield political power and constantly being in a cycle to achieve it, right? And there's a give and take there, and we just can't be fooled by the grandstanders. I think that's kind of the baseline.
Right. Maybe one way to avoid the ideology problem, the factionalism problem, the empty rhetoric problem is to focus more on real life. Mm-hmm. And maybe this is where people get wary of like, oh, this is culture war stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, but we're also just talking about like the things we actually do.
Yeah.
Like we could talk all day about platitudes and esoteric, abstract stuff that doesn't mean a whole lot, but it like riles up my base.
Right.
Or we could just talk about what's actually happening and where the problems actually lie. And let's get frank and honest about conversations oriented around solutions. Mm-hmm. And I wish as well we would, you have to seek common ground in order to have any kind of a meaningful conversation.
Right.
Right. So if we desired to have more genuine dialogues about meaningful things, it would mean at the very least trying to find something like, what do I agree with my political enemy on? Like, how far back do I have to zoom out before we can be like, oh yeah, we agree on that, and then figure out, well, where's the disconnect? Are we talking like completely different goals in mind? And if so, let's have that debate about why is your ideal society the opposite of mine. Right. Let's talk about that. Or maybe we have a lot more in common when it comes to what we're pursuing big picture, but we talk more about methods and means and don't give up on that conversation so fast or demonize and assume the worst of my opponent. Right. It doesn't really do anybody any good when we do that. But it's not just that it doesn't produce fruit. It's like it's so deeply toxic. It is exactly the kind of factionalism that Washington foresaw and was like, guys, run away from this. free yourself from this at all costs.
Yeah.
And, I don't know what Washington would think about our party system, two-party system today. But it's a thing. It's what we've got. At the end of the day, the only people who can really affect change are the voters.
Right.
But you have to think outside of the two boxes that are handed to you, right? In order to really do that well. And that goes back to an informed population like you're talking about. And if there's one thing we're really failing at, it's educating our kids.
Oh, absolutely.
So
yeah, that's a great. Let's talk about education a little bit. I think there's a ton of unintended consequences from some really bad education policy over the years, right? So this outright rejection of school choice is a significant problem because it doesn't allow parents the freedom to educate their children where they think best, right?
Yep.
Not every child should go to college. Not every child should go to trade school. Not every child should be in a public school. Not every child should be in a classical school. There's a need for a dynamic range of education options. And the person who understands that best is the parent, right? And when we think about the ways education has changed, we have to go back to Brown v. Board of Education, right? And we were talking about this a little bit too before we were recording. But Malcolm Gladwell, love him, hate him. He's got some really bad hot takes. He has some really good hot takes. But he kind of dove into that case. And one of the things that he was talking about is if you look at the amount of currently the amount of black teachers compared to white teachers is substantially lower. Why is that? Why is it that there are not more black role models for kids out there, specifically within education? And if you look at the results of Brown v. Board of Education, when they integrated these school systems, they just fired the black teachers, right? Like there was no longer a need for double the teachers. And so those are the ones that they fired. And it created this giant gap in teachers.
unbelievable.
Yeah. And so the government said, we know best. We are going to take on this social engineering.
Yeah.
We're going to integrate these schools at all costs, and it's going to make life better for everybody. And that's just not true, right? Where the government should have said, look, it is not right that these folks are segregated. There's no reason for it. We're all made in the image of God. We all have that dignity and that worth and that value. But parents should make the final decision on where their kids go to school. And we're going to allow them school choice. If the students have a better educational experience staying in the school that they're in, the parents should be allowed to let them do that. If they think they're going to have a better education opportunity in the school across the street or across town, they should be allowed to do that too. And instead of putting power back at the local level where it belongs with the family, they took it and said, Big Brother knows best. And that has been a consistent trend with our education over the years, right? Then we said, hey, every kid needs to go to college. So we're going to federally back these student loans. And we're going to take on mountains of debt for these students. And it doesn't really matter what degree they get. They'll pay it back eventually because we're in a capitalist society. As opposed to saying, well, not all jobs are the same. Everybody that goes into, we'll take my degree area, for example, government and communications is going to be able to find a job when they get out of college. And the job that they get may not value that degree as much as the job that they wanted to get. And now they're saddled with this debt. So we did that, and we said, take on as much as you need, as much as you want. We'll continue to pay for it. Go to grad school, do your thing, kick the can down the road. You'll make the money back eventually. Well, they did that, and then they came back and said, well, actually, you don't need to pay that back. That was our mistake. Your education is costing you too much money. We'll start paying off your loans for you. And now they've transferred that debt from the people who went to college to the people who have been working and the people who continue to work and continue to make good money. And it's a misvaluation of what an education's worth, right? I hate to continue to quote Gladwell all the time, but
fine.
He has a great
Yeah.
he does have a great pitch on education as well. He gives an example of a student who was at Brown University. She wanted to be a doctor. She was in their pre-med program and found a total lack of cooperation with the other students. It was cutthroat. Nobody wanted to work together. Nobody wanted to learn. They were just there to compete to get into a better medical school. And she hated it.
Yeah.
So what did she do? She stayed at Brown and she became an attorney. Her second school that she had in her back pocket was the University of Maryland. University of Maryland is nowhere, according to the world, nowhere near as good of a school as Brown. But if she had gone to University of Maryland, she would have been in the top 25% of her class, possibly even the top 10% of her class. She would have found a much different learning environment, a much more cooperative learning environment. She probably would have enjoyed it more, and she probably would have gone on to become a doctor. Now, nobody knows for sure because it didn't happen and there's no guarantees.
Right.
But his purpose in saying this was, even now with a lot of employers, they're not looking at what school you went to. They're looking at where did you graduate in your class.
Yeah.
So it's a better decision for you to go to a, quote, lower ranked school where you will fit in more and stand out more than a higher ranked school where you will be lower in your class ranking. He summed it up to buying a Rolex. He said buying a Rolex is not a correct response to the need to know what time it is, right? That is a luxury that you've decided to use for yourself. So there's getting into an Ivy League school does not guarantee you success, right? But that's what our education system is promised. Our education system is promised is you come into our public kindergarten or public pre-K because both parents have to work now and they can't take care of their kids on their own. So we're going to subsidize the child care. We're going to let them start school at the age of 2. You're going to, or I mean, really, if you're in daycare, you're starting from birth, like after your mom hands you off, right, and goes back to work. From birth till 22, 24, 25, depending on if you go to grad school and what kind of grad school you go to. That's an awful long time to be influenced by the government and to be influenced by people who are opposed to the majority of what we say is important. And unless we enact some type of school choice, students are going to be trapped. And that school choice is what gets them out of that trap and opens up opportunities. It encourages public schools to be more competitive. It encourages public schools to actually crack down on students that are causing problems and correct those behaviors and limit the bullying and the speaking out in class and all that type of stuff that distracts from learning. It encourages them to pay their teachers more, reduce administrative costs. It encourages them to offer unique curriculums. It encourages them to have different or better sports programs. It encourages schools to specialize in what they want to be known for and what they want to be good at, and then attract those students, which is a race to the top instead of the current race to the bottom.
Yeah. Incentives matter.
Mm-hmm.
And the systems that we build now, especially the ones that we hand our kids, they're going to shape not just generations to come, but, time is the most valuable resource, right? Mm-hmm. So all these kids, they grow up and at a certain point they turn around and they say, well, what have I been handed?
Yeah.
By my society, by my country, my community, my school system.
Mm-hmm.
What did the generation before me that, brought us in here, what have they handed me to function with and to move forward with? And I feel really bad for the kids coming up today. It's too easy to point the finger at them and be like, oh, kids these days.
Right. Yeah.
Too easy.
Yeah.
Of course that's true. We all were, screw-ups for a certain season and fighting against the thing that was most healthy for us. Like we resist, the good at times and we don't identify the bad and we swallow it all. By the grace of God alone, we make it through this thing.
Right.
But we do need to take the role that we have as one generation raising up the next way more seriously. I see way too much ease with which, we look at kids these days and we either give ourselves a pass because kids these days are crazy.
Right.
Or we don't even ask the question of like, are we really setting kids up to succeed?
Yeah.
Are we actually? Like that's supposedly the purpose of this system. And we're throwing so much money at it. Are we doing that well? And I feel like if we could have more honest appraisal of our current approach, it would actually open up the conversation to more. We should think a lot more freely about different options, right? Like a lot of things that we're not trying right now because it's very politically incorrect.
Yeah.
Like, could we seriously look at society and the way our education system has changed since we banned prayer from public schools in the 60s, I believe?
Yeah.
Like, what's been the fruit of that? What's the net takeaway? are we really going to say that we're better off for that?
Yeah.
And I think we have a very programmed ideological response now. It's like, oh, well, you're not supposed to ask that question because that's like a God question. And we can't talk about that. So
Yeah, we can't talk about something that's core to identity.
doesn't really compute, which means we're the opposite of educated and rational and pragmatic.
An enlightened individual.
We are programmed to think within a very tiny range of acceptable thought and certain questions which are acceptable and the rest are not.
Right.
And even though, our kids are the ones suffering.
Yeah. And it assumes that by not asking the question, that the topic is just totally avoided, right? It's like we talked about earlier. It's if you don't legislate this morality, a different morality will be legislated, right? If you don't address the God question, that doesn't mean that he doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that people aren't searching for meaning. It doesn't mean that people aren't trying to fill that God-shaped hole in their heart with everything they can get their hands on. It just means that you're not giving them a potential answer. Well, we would say the answer to that problem, right?
Yeah. There's a great movie, Calvary. Have you seen it? Not a family-friendly film, but it's about this Irish Catholic priest, Roman Catholic priest in Ireland. The whole movie it's pretty dark. It's a dark look at life in a parish. And it's basically, the movie opens up with this priest receiving a confession and the penitent promises to murder the priest at the end of the week. He's like, I'm going to kill you next week. And then the rest of the movie is the following week and how the priest goes about his normal life and what's going to happen. Anyway, I won't spoil it. But over the course of the 7 days, the whole movie is kind of a beautiful commentary on the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah.
And all this stuff is going on that's like rich in symbolism and whatnot. But at one point, the priest is in the local pub. And I forgot he's in there with like his full cassock regalia on. And it's either someone sitting next to him or the bartender is like, what's your game? You come in here dressed like this, trying to make a statement. Like the world has moved past you and your kind. Like you don't really belong here anymore. Maybe you had your time, that's gone. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. What's his response going to be? And the priest doesn't start making, philosophical defense for the belief in God or an argument for the historicity of the church or show all of the degrees he has in biblical languages. No, he just looks at the guy and he kind of snickers and he's like, you really don't understand human nature. Yeah. And I think that is the pivotal mistake that we do make in our arrogance, our modern arrogance, is we're completely blinded to the reality of human nature. I think Dennis Prager, he comments on this a lot. Like you talk to a progressive and you ask them, what do you think human nature is? Yeah. And they'll be completely what's the word? Sideswiped? No. Blindsided.
There it is.
They'll be blindsided. Yeah. Because that's not a category. They don't view a human being as any kind of a defined thing with a nature and with intuitions and a calling, a vocation, right? They just look at it as a lump of clay. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of why our education system has failed so utterly, is because we tend to view people today like we live like nihilists, right? Our society has been pushed into this corner where in the secular public sphere, we can't allow God to actually influence this. We have to free people from God. And thus we functionally are nihilists and atheists, and we treat people according to that worldview, and thus we treat them like lumps of clay. And it turns out that they're not lumps of clay. Right. And we've completely missed the boat on human nature. And we end up leaving so many broken lives. Yes. In the wake of this failed experiment.
Yeah. Like you said, we think the culture tells us life is not connected, that nothing is connected in life, that it's all individualistic, it's all siloed.
It's all random.
Yeah. Right. So
everything is by definition random.
Yeah. So if you sit down to teach a kid math in that siloed perspective, right? You're teaching numbers and you're teaching memorization. You're not teaching understanding. You're not teaching understanding of where does math come from? Why is math important? Why does math work? Right? Like, why is it just this magic? Like, why is it that this series of thoughts makes sense? What's your intellectual context for understanding this as an area of study, right? Same thing is true for morality, for any aspect of life, right? It's all connected. And if you tell students that none of the morality parts of life matter, that you can do whatever you want to do with whoever you want to be with, and it's all about your personal satisfaction, it's just a totally bankrupt set of views, and it's a waste of time, and it doesn't build on anything.
And the great irony is you do not set people up to actually achieve any kind of satisfaction.
Yes.
In a real sense.
Yeah.
And that's, again, where all of this is, it's not just spiritual mumbo jumbo. Mm-hmm. This is utterly pragmatic.
Yeah.
Utterly practical. There's no more practical question than what is the good life and how do we live it? Because that's what we're all pursuing.
Right.
Aristotle knew this. Every single thing that people do is oriented towards some perception of the good. Right. Some perceived good that you're pursuing.
Yeah. And we've substituted a good life for I can't even think of a good word to use, just an empty life. Like the fact that now the American dream is to retire at 50 and play golf for the rest of your life. What a bunch of hogwash. Like, what a meaningless existence to just wake up and grab your golf clubs and go to the links. Like, that. What's the point, right? What's the point? There is no point in it at all. Now, it's not to say that you can't enjoy these things and you can't relax and you can't do that, but mankind is, like you said, has a calling, has a purpose, and is the chief end of man to glorify God and do that through whatever that calling and purpose is, right?
Yeah.
And it's, again, there's nothing that says you can't stop formal work at some point in your life, but until you die, your job is to form and fill the earth, right? That's what you're here for. And you find great satisfaction in doing that. That's why gardening is such a great hobby, right? It's incredibly satisfying. That's why having a group of friends that you sit down and talk about life with on a regular basis is so satisfying, right? Because you're discussing not just the events of the day, but the morality of the day, of what's going on in your life. And you're supporting each other as you continue to grow together in community and relationship. Like, just this idea of being an individual and travel, right? Like, everybody's obsessed with traveling, right? Like, that was a curse. That was a curse at the beginning of the world, right? And now it's what everybody.
That's how you died.
Yeah,
you hit the road. Yeah,
absolutely. And we're like perpetually running away from family and from commitment and from responsibility, which is where we find some of the greatest satisfaction in life.
Maybe we should bring pilgrimages back.
That's a good idea.
Right.
Travel with a purpose, other than just sitting on a different beach.
But the point of that kind of travel is it's embracing a form of hardship.
Right.
Which is why it's a spiritual discipline, not because it's a...
Well, that's not... Have you hiked the Appalachian Trail?
What's that?
Have you hiked the Appalachian Trail? That sounds like something that somebody who's hiked the Appalachian Trail would say. Travel with a purpose. It's self-discipline. It's tough.
I think I've done a tiny stretch of the Appalachian Trail, technically, like right at the base.
Yeah.
When I was doing some exploration with Bailey recently. But, I mean, coming from California and being in Yosemite,
sure.
Like, there's a joy in getting out in nature and hiking and doing it with purpose.
Yeah.
In anything we do.
Right.
We're either striving to glorify God all the more with everything that we have and view everything as an opportunity to glorify God all the more, or we lose sight of that and it becomes like, oh, now I have more opportunity to golf more.
Right.
And I mean, you show me someone who thinks that they're happy because they've lowered their standards of joy and their expectations for life and relationship to, as long as I can hit the links every day for the rest of my life. I mean, I think, I'll show you someone who's not at peace.
Yeah.
And someone who's never really experienced the kind of joy that God designed us for.
Absolutely. And you can substitute golf with whatever it is that you're using as a distraction.
Golf uniquely.
It's just this
whatever your escape mechanism is.
Right. And you can't live in the escape. And it's also a perversion of something good, right? Like, like you talked about, getting out in nature with a purpose, go playing with some friends, having those conversations that you get to have over a long walk, right? Like those are good things. But it's when we say, well, if you just do the action, then you'll be happy, right? That's kind of that's how we've reduced all of this. It's like travel. Just do the action. Just go somewhere and you'll be happy. Like,
right. I mean, are you serving yourself through whatever the thing is?
Right.
And your pleasure-seeking drive, or are you earnestly loving God and loving your neighbor?
Yeah.
Like maybe your time on the golf course with your dad
Right.
is the highlight of your week and some of the most precious moments of your relationship.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Absolutely. Do it. Enjoy it to the fullest.
That glorifies God.
Yeah.
Tremendously.
100%. So if you golf with your dad, don't hate us. We think you're great. Keep doing it.
It's easy for me to not golf because I don't play golf.
Yeah, me neither.
But
I
you
need to,
can start
but I
using things that I do.
No, we won't talk about anything we actually do. We'll just other people.
I do want to pick up golf, though.
That's the key to success.
It's a goal for me this year.
Yeah.
Everyone in Georgia, North Georgia, plays golf.
Seems that way.
It sure seems this way. I mean, it's the home of the Masters.
True.
So,
Well, technically, but that's basically South Carolina, but we won't get into that. Yes. So I think we've beat education with
how do we leave it on a more positive note, Bryce?
I think we leave it with education begins at home, and even when
Yeah, I wanted to pivot to the family as well, because
Yeah.
parenting is so crucial in all of this.
yeah,
Let's suffice it to say, parents matter
Yes.
more than we could possibly ever say. And that goes back to your economic point as well about, I wish more of our political conversations, economic conversations did come back to what is a living wage and how do we actually expect to get back to that?
yeah,
Because
yes,
it's a different world from 1973 when the average home had one income.
right,
And that was sufficient. And like way more Americans owned their own home
right.
at that time. It says a lot about the way the market has moved. And it hasn't been to the advantage of the American consumer.
It hasn't. And part of that, there's a number of reasons for it. I think one of it is a misunderstanding on younger consumers of what that looks like, right? People are wanting much higher end furnishings. They're wanting much larger houses from the beginning. It's not something that we're going to grow into or that we're going to do the hard work of and develop. It's from day one, I want a McMansion, and which is just not feasible, right? It's not accurate. It's not a correct. It's like the Rolex. Like it's not a correct response for the need to own a home, right? But the market is adjusted to that, and so you can't go find a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house for $200,000 anymore. That doesn't exist.
Fair point. And how much of that is because people aren't getting married as young as they
Correct.
used to?
Right.
And they're not looking for a home for their one baby. Like
Right.
now you're later in life, you're getting married, you're older, you have more money, so your tastes are more developed.
Yeah.
You don't even have a kid, so do you really need the extra bedrooms?
Right. So
But they're going to
let's have a
cost you.
townhome. Yeah.
It's interesting. You're right. All these factors tie together into like what is the American social imagination,
Right.
and a lot of that reflects our assumptions for life and love and relationships and family and all these other things.
Yeah. And from a government perspective, that's a local development thing, right? There's a great organization out there called Strong Towns. They have a podcast. They have a book that I highly recommend. And I think we mentioned it in an earlier episode. I think it might have been on the family where, it kind of highlights the change from garage doors to less front porches, more garage doors, right? It's much more suburban. We don't walk to work anymore. We don't live where we work. We don't live where we go to church. We drive across town for things. But when you talk
And
about...
are we better off?
No.
Are we all happier?
Absolutely not.
Right.
We're more upset. We're more disgruntled. We're more disconnected.
Way more road rage.
Yeah. And we don't have a bowling league anymore. And it's not just because people don't like bowling. It's because they're having to work 12 or 14-hour days. And they come home and they're mentally and physically exhausted. And they don't want to go out with their friends. They want to sit at home and watch their TV and go to sleep and then drink heavier than they should and get ready for the next day.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Like that's a normal American routine, unfortunately.
Yep.
And when you have that much financial stress that's being driven by this marketing of the American ideal of big home, nice cars, this financial independence to travel, to do whatever. You're driving up credit card debt. You're increasing. You're basically teaching people to not be satisfied, right? We're losing that satisfaction of, okay, this may be small, but it's mine.
Yeah. We really do need to rediscover the joy of simple and real things. Who was it? I heard commenting recently on, everyone is saying that print journalism is dead and paper is dead. It's so funny. It sounds a lot like The Office. Like The Office was onto this, right?
Yes.
Like, is there a point to making paper anymore if everything's digital?
Right.
And they handle this in hilarious ways. But I think that there's something deeply beautiful and true about the whole, Michael Scott and his whole, he's adamantly defending paper, and there's something real about it. And so long as people are here, you need paper, and you kind of link those two things together as like a real tangible thing in a world that's becoming more virtual.
Yeah.
But the virtual world has its fascination in the fact that it's mimicking something that's real. But what do you do with future generations that don't remember the real thing?
Right.
And they don't even really automatically intuit the convenience, the added convenience of having the real thing in a virtual form. All they know is the virtual thing, which is now a shadow of the real thing.
It's like Soylent Green.
Yes.
This is a great movie if you haven't seen it. It's
Charlton Heston, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Edward G. Robinson. And Edward G. Robinson's character, if I remember right, Charlton Heston's working this scene because he's a cop in the future, and he's working this murder case, and they find in this extremely wealthy person's apartment this piece of meat and this, I think it's a leaf of lettuce and a carrot, I think is what it was. And he brings them back, and him and Edward G. Robinson are looking at this, and Robinson's making this comment about exactly what you're saying. Like, I haven't seen a leaf of lettuce in decades. Right?
Oh, that's right.
And it's that reminder of like what is real and what is the form in its fullness.
Because all they have is a new type of food that's
Soylent.
like
and it comes in different colors. No, it's like edible. It's almost like a chalky edible bar, and they have them in green and red and orange and whatever. And different days of the week.
I saw this as a
different
kid.
ones. Yeah,
and it was deeply traumatizing.
Oh,
I haven't gone back to it.
Oh, it's good. Highly recommend. It's called Soylent Green for a reason. You gotta watch it to find out.
We're not
why.
going to spoil it.
No spoilers here.
Even though it's from like the 60s or something.
70s. And it's highly worth it. It's a classic.
Yeah. Okay.
It needs to be experienced by all. But
yeah, so real things matter. And like
exactly.
I would even say it's not about lowering our expectations. I think so much of this conversation is about raising our expectations.
Correct.
For peace and joy and order and relationship in life.
Yeah.
You look left and right, the failures and the breakdowns in societies and families and education and politics, it's not because our expectations are too high.
Right.
We're either just deluded and we have like false views of reality, social media. We're comparing ourselves to like the 1% of the 1%.
Yeah.
And then we're unhappy because we're delusional about what the real world is. But when you get back to the real world, like the way we actually live, it reflects very low expectations for ourselves and for others.
Yes, for ourselves, for others, and for people. And we'll circle it back to the government piece for people who lead us, right? Like Congress has
abysmally
abdicated.
Low.
Congress has abdicated so much authority to the regulatory state, right? They pass a piece of legislation that's going to go to the EPA, and instead of filling it out in detail of what it allows and what it doesn't allow, they say, "Well, let the content experts handle this." And what happens is the EPA ends up writing these regulations that have the authority and power of law, and they're unelected bureaucrats that are normally not good at what they do. They're bad at what they do, which is why they work for the government, and they have ulterior motives, right? So if you look at the number of procurement officers out of the Pentagon that after they approve some large purchase end up working for that defense contractor that they just purchased from for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, this is the pipeline. That's what they do. That's how these people do this job and how they retire.
It's graft.
It is. It absolutely.
In the words of...
Yes.
Wait, what was his first name? Was it Alexander?
Jefferson.
Jefferson D?
It was Jefferson Davis Smith.
Was it Davis?
I don't think it was.
If it was, I missed that.
I don't think it was.
That'd be hilarious. It was probably Jefferson Lincoln Smith.
Maybe, yeah, probably. Jeff Smith.
But in the great words of Jeff Smith,
yeah,
it's graft.
right.
And it's there. It's almost too easy to find that stuff
It
if you
is.
just start scratching below the surface.
Yeah.
So I wish we raised our expectations and we were ready to enforce them or act on them personally. Now it's really hard when you're talking about bureaucrats at a federal level,
Right.
And like, how much
Well,
are you going to turn your life upside down
Yeah.
and be enraged and write how many angry letters?
You don't have to be. I don't think you have to be enraged. I think it's you just have to be conscious of what's going on. And if your current congressman, your current representative at the state, federal level, isn't giving opportunities for you to ask questions, that's a red flag, right? If they're not coming to the community and saying, "Look, here's what we're working on. Here's what we're doing. Let's talk about this."
Yeah.
Now, sometimes they're dissuaded from doing that because of the state of the local parties, both Republican and Democrat. If they show any type of moderation, these parties will just jump on them and they will run them out of town on a rail. So I can understand where some representatives are hesitant to come back and say, "Look, here's what we're doing," because the people that are the noisiest tend to be the most engaged, which is unfortunate.
Right.
But if your representative is not giving you those opportunities, you need to be encouraging them to do that. And then when they are coming to town, it may not be convenient, but take the time, go meet them, go shake their hand, go look at them in the eye, and at least let them know that you're paying attention, right? And I think that's where it starts. You can't be there. There has to be a dissonance between every aspect of world politics in my life, right? Like you can't allow your life to be dictated by all of it. You can only care about so much.
Right.
And so you just have to care about what's most local, I think, what's most local to you. And then what are the bigger issues that the Lord has placed on your heart that you're working on and that you feel engaged over. And then focus on those things. But don't try and keep up with everything. You can't do it. And it's a good thing that you can't do it either, right? It adds too much stress to your life. It distracts from the good and the joyful and the true. But yeah, I think you start by finding ways to be engaged locally and then just let it grow.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to your point, just keep your eyes open, pay attention, and stick around.
Yeah, and ask questions. And if something seems to be too good to be true, there it is. It probably is, right? Yeah, but I think this is good. I don't want to. We've gone a little long on this one, but I think it's been worthwhile.
Yeah.
Definitely a good discussion. So I think we got one more episode coming up.
You covered factualism. You hit on the administrative state, the role of the bureaucracy.
Yeah, lack of role of the bureaucracy. Disbanded.
Yeah, what's the word? The over delegation of authority from Congress.
What a mess.
All of that. Education. Touched on the family.
It was good.
It's good.
Full. Yep. I think, like I said, I think we have one more episode left. We'll try and wrap up everything and leave some parting thoughts. And
Yeah.
just like that, season 2's done.
Well done, Bryce.
Right back at you. Spencer.
Good stuff.
Yep. Hey, everybody, this is Bryce Futch, host and creator of the Way Forward podcast, and I wanted to take a minute and tell you about our sponsor for Season 2, Stand for Georgia Values Political Action Committee. They exist to ensure that every vote in Georgia is an informed vote, providing clear, concise, and accurate information about the issues and candidates shaping our future. They do some incredible work finding phenomenal candidates at a local level throughout North Georgia, and then also doing some work across the state as well. But you can find out more information about them at standforgeorgiavaluespac.com. We're incredibly grateful to have them as a sponsor. Like I said, not only have they sponsored season 2, but they're going to continue to sponsor the podcast moving forward. So hopefully you'll be getting some more regular content from us. Be on the lookout for that next month. We're very excited for what is to come on the way forward. Full disclosure, I do serve as their executive director of that organization and their partnered 501c3 Stand for Georgia Values Foundation. But thanks again to Stand for Georgia Values PAC for their sponsorship. Please check out their website and be involved with them so that they can continue to support the work that we do here at The Way Forward. Thanks for listening.